Hi, this is Brian, and welcome to Podcast on Wheels, powered by Power Loops. Today, we've got a very special treat for you in studio. Brian Mayfield. Brian is a Christ follower. He's a dad. He's a preacher. He is also a great friend of mine that I actually got to know before I knew much about him because we go to the same gym. So welcome to the studio, Brian.
Thank you, sir. Good to be here.
Thank you. So as you get to know a guy at the gym and you start to talk to him, and we were introduced by another friend named Brian. And so it was just the three Brians making conversation. And then after I got to know you and started learning, and we've had some lunches, I wanted you to come join us on the show to tell people some of the stuff we talk about at lunch or, kind of share with them kind of thing. So, take over right here and you kind of lead us with what are the expectations and what we were talking about pre-show there. So.
Sure. Well, so most of our conversations, even if they don't start with it, they wind up about faith and our relationship with Christ. And I remember a couple months ago, I told you I'm reading this book, Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes. And I could tell immediately you were like, oh, I need to hear about this. The first chapter, right out of the bat, the guy begins talking about how when I use the term through Eastern eyes, the book is about the fact that we as Westerners, we read the Bible automatically through a filter, a lens, like we see it a certain way. And so what if we were able to understand it better, like when it was written? Like what did these things mean to a first century Jew who knew who Jesus was, right? And right out of the bat, the book starts by talking about how we have all these misconceptions even of the Christmas story. And I'll just chunk a few of them out there.
All right.
So when we think of the story of Jesus, like what are some of the things that immediately come to your mind? Like whether we're talking about the pastor getting up on Christmas Eve and reading from Luke 2,
right,
or what are some of the things that come to your mind?
Time of year, schedules, there's a lot of people having different opinions on why, what, where and at the end of it, it's, for me now it's about family, but there's been many different versions of, what are we doing and how does this go? And so, there's, I guess confusion is my answer because I'm trying to sit here and give you an answer.
Right.
And I'm not sure.
Well, so, there are parts of the Christmas story that we have in our head, and everybody's are probably going to look different. But for me, like I think about Joseph putting Mary on a donkey and having to travel really far back to Bethlehem. And he gets there and it's probably freezing cold. It's the middle of the night. And we read there was no room for them in the inn. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, you and I grew up. We went on vacation, stayed in the Holiday Inn. Yeah. So we're thinking like they banged on the door of a motel. There was a no vacancy sign. Well, in reality, in the first century in Israel, in Bethlehem, a house would have been this big, long, rectangular building, flat roof. And when you walked into a home, there would have been this entry area that was sunken down so you would go up into the rest of the home. All right. Well, at night, especially if it's cold, somebody's going to bring their animals into that entry area. And then as you stepped up, there would have been troughs or things for an animal to eat out of. The Bible calls that a manger. Okay. All right. So I'm Joseph. I have my wife, Mary, and I'm coming to Bethlehem because that's where my family is from. Well, who's my family? The beginning of Matthew tells us Joseph is from the line of King David. There's no one bigger from Bethlehem than King David, right? Stu and I were talking about this earlier. If Nick Saban's son shows up in Tuscaloosa today and walks in a restaurant, is there any conceivable scenario in your head where they say, hey, sorry, we don't have a table for you? No. Well, so Joseph's got family in this city, and he's from the line of King David. He's not in a barn. Okay, there wasn't a no vacancy sign and they got stuck in a barn. They're in somebody's home. But again, it's getting late into that season. So the home's probably full. And so when Mary gave birth, you don't want all the men around. Right. They're probably down in that end of the home where the animals were. And Jesus is born, no crib around. Well, we throw some hay in one of those troughs and we lay that baby down. But so immediately right there, my image of Christmas is changed. Like, that's not going to sell little figurines that'll sit on my mantle at Christmas, right? But so you have to ask the question, why have for years and years have we fostered those? They're not necessarily like unbiblical ideas, but they're not historically as accurate as we could be. Why would we go on letting Jesus in our head be born in a barn, like with cows and sheep crap and all that stuff around, rather than, well, no, very likely he was born like in a living room, and there may have been some cows in the house. Right. You know, I think it's because we want if this is the Messiah, like, all right, well, first of all, we would want our king to come riding in on a white horse, sword drawn, you know, get Rome out of here, clean this place out. Well, strike one, he's coming as a baby. Right. All right, so if he's coming as a baby, well, at least let's make that extreme. Nope. And that is, to me, the ripple. That was Jesus's life. It was just this one non-assuming kind of under the radar thing after another, you know, and until he steps out at 30 years old, like we don't, from 12 or 13 to 30, we got nothing. And I'm looking forward one day to hearing, like, so what went on there, Lord? Like, we don't know, like, when did Joseph die? When did his dad die? Obviously, his dad was alive for a certain period of time, because we understand Jesus grew up being a carpenter like his dad was. Dad had to teach him some of those things. But there are so many of these things that we don't know. But for the things that we do, you know, what if we had the clearest, most accurate understanding that we could? So, like, my whole idea of Christmas, like, now when I see, I'm driving to Huntsville this morning to go get something, and I see a church's billboard about they're doing the live nativity. Well, now it's like in my mind, all I want to do is go find the nativity things and just go, you got this wrong, you know. But the being born in a living room, that's not going to sell anything. So
that's like, as we're sitting there, and guys, we're sitting at a local restaurant, and you started talking to me, and you said, you got kids and your wife's had a baby. Would you want her having it in front of everybody? But you started putting things in perspective for me. So as we approach this season, and a lot of people can recognize different things, but you have a way of making this make better sense and giving it an opportunity to be shared. So, that's why you're the guest and I'm the host. It's your show to explain that to us, so take that next step and how that can be shared.
Well, I think that a great question, let's say I share all of this with you, or I was assuming and I thought somebody else wanted to hear all of this. And my question back would be like, who cares? Like, why ultimately did you think I needed to hear that? Like, what does it ultimately matter for me whether Jesus was born out in a barn, like rejected, or if he was born in somebody's living room where actually he was quite welcomed? I think the reason why it's important is it comes down to who Jesus was and why he came. I need to know that there's nothing in this life I have felt, that I've experienced. The Bible says that there's no temptation that we face that our Lord, he didn't face that as well. And yet he endured it. He was without sin. But I need to know that Jesus can look at me and on any level say, I understand. And now, okay, so let's go further with it and say, well, what about for the person who was born in a barn? You're missing the point. Like, I think it's important for us to understand the heart of God and that he chose to come. If I'm God, which great thing I'm not, and I'm coming, like, I want everybody to know. Billboards, red carpet, the whole 9 yards. I'm going to announce it to important people, right? Who does God come and like freak out, announce all of this to? Shepherds. And again, let's go down the road of like, we have an idea in our head of shepherds, but our idea is probably lacking. On the one hand, I think we all would understand, like, these are guys who maybe wouldn't be in everybody else's social circle. They're working third shift. But what we don't understand is if we had rungs, if you will, in society, imagine that. But in the first
like
century,
where we judged people,
right? Like on appearance or whatever. Crazy idea. Well, in the first century, there's nobody lower than lepers.
Yeah.
Okay. Right above that, shepherds. I mean, the only thing Jesus could have done the Lord could have done to go a little further with it was if he had announced his arrival to a leper colony. But then the lepers would have shown up and infected everybody in Jesus' family. So he announces this to shepherds, and it's just one very non-assuming event after another. Joseph and Mary take him to the temple 8 days old to be dedicated like you're supposed to in that day and time. They're not going to say anything about, hey, we got the Son of God. Wanted y'all to know we're here, But yet God places this man there, this prophet named Simeon, who holds this baby and just knows, I can die now. I have seen the fulfillment of what God's come to do. And it's an 8-day-old baby. So I think the topic, I think that the whole subject, it comes down to that I don't think there's anything greater. Well, let me remove some words. There's nothing greater in this world than a person's need to know God's love for them. And that love, it wasn't just manifested, it wasn't just produced, it was perfected in the person of Christ, in the Son of God coming. And so anything that I can share with somebody where the Lord can use that to provoke, to inspire, to spark within them the hunger for that knowledge, it's worth talking about.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a great way to say it, because there are, you hear the stories over and over, as you said, about Christmas. And okay, well, it happened at this time. Was it snowing there? Was it not? Was it, wait, where, what? Okay, well, if it was in a house or this, but then you look at the big picture, or you're looking at this, but the truth and understanding how that could pertain to somebody, and how you could help guide somebody with their walk or their experiences there. So, there's things that you and I have talked about, that I've shared with you, that I wouldn't mind being shared here. But ultimately, we go through things and we experience things, and we're looking at it going, okay, well, as Christmas is coming, seasonal things happen, mentalities, different things. So what's something that you see could benefit the most right now?
Well, I think with Christmas coming, I think that, first of all, if you are a Christian, this bears down on, how do I view Christmas? How do I approach this? Several years ago, this movement was started called Advent Conspiracy. Okay. And it was essentially a movement to try and take back Christmas from consumerism. And I think that my wife and I, our kids were little. We had determined, like, early on, we don't want to foster lies with our kids. But I think that in retrospect, we might have gotten to fifth gear with this. But let me explain. So we had decided, didn't matter how young our kids were, the first time they asked us, is there a Santa? Is Santa real? Is this true? We weren't going to lie to them. So probably by the time my kids were 7 and 5, they already know Santa was a real dude, but he doesn't come and down your chimney and doesn't bring everybody presents. And he was actually a guy that years and years ago understood the heart of Christmas, understood the heart of giving. But so my kids know the truth.
I interrupt you because at phase 3, I got a text message about 2 years ago when my boys were 7 and 5. Could you please come tell your kids to stop telling all the other kids? And I went, oh, bro. So I had to interrupt you there.
Okay.
At the gym.
So I'm about to repeat Valerie, your story. Yes.
But it was.
We are called.
I feel you, yeah.
We go pick up Nate at Asbury Preschool.
Okay.
And the teacher comes out in the hallway and says, hey, so I had to pull Nate out in the hall today because we were telling a story about Santa, and he decided he needed to tell everybody that's not true. So my son is Paul Revere. He's riding into town to tell everyone the truth, the news. I look back and I think, okay, maybe we could have walked that out a little slower, because I understand the heart behind Santa, right? The danger is continuing to foster the mentality that Christmas is about getting rather than about Christmas being the gift of the Son of God. And what it should be is that as this season's here, Advent. What's Advent? What's this Latin word that means the arrival of something? So if we're celebrating Advent, we're trying to put ourselves in the place of, I live in the first century. For 400 years, like the book of Malachi, the prophecies of Malachi were written, and for 400 years, God went silent, nothing. And so, we're waiting, and he comes, right? And so I'm trying to put myself in this mindset of anticipation of the Son of God's coming, you know. And so when I think about in this season, God gave us that greatest gift. Well, that ought to compel me of like, well, you know what? I want to give my wife something special. I want to give my kids something special. Not because I want them to have the gratification that everything they wanted, they got, but so that they see just a glimpse of the love and the heart of God in that. And that I see it in that my wife, she knows I can't buy anything for this guy, but she finds something that she's like, oh, Brian will like this, you know? And it ought to be a thing that I open a gift. And even if it's something that I'm like, when in heaven's name am I going to use this? That I am 10 times more overwhelmed by the generosity and the heart of the person than, is this a practical thing that I can use?
Right.
You know, but that's what it's become. And so I think that for us as Christians, we have to do a serious like examination of what is my heart and my mind even on when I think about Christmas. But for the person who isn't a Christian, it is an opportunity to ask the life-changing question, who is Jesus? Like, because the commercial Christmas, if you want to make it about that, that's fine. But understand, you wouldn't even have that holiday if the person of Jesus Christ had not come. That's why we celebrate this. It would be like somebody taking Independence Day and deciding, well, I want to use that for something else. Well, that's fine and all, but July 4th is about the fact that we don't belong to England anymore, right? If you want to make it about that you got a new sailboat, okay, fine. But so this is an opportunity to evaluate, and I think it's again, let me erase, I think. It is the question that every person on this planet has to reckon with. Who is Jesus? Is he the Son of God who came, died for the sins of the world, and is coming again? Or was he just a loony dude?
Here at Smith Financial Services, we take care of small business owners, 1099 contract workers, and their families. We know insurance can be rough if you're a small business owner, so we are here to make things easy. Visit our website, smithfinancial.services, to learn more.
Because, you know, as C.S. Lewis once said, you can't say Jesus was a good teacher unless you believe that he is exactly who he said he was. He is either the Son of God or he is the most egotistical, egomaniacal teacher who ever came. And so you can't give Jesus he said some good things. He was a good prophet, a good teacher. No, sorry. He was either the Son of God or he is not worth listening to. So you have to come to that conclusion. You have to make that decision.
It's funny where you hear things, you think about things. It's like, I'll tell you, I was watching a Joe Rogan podcast the other day with Kid Rock, and he asked him who would he want to meet, and he said Jesus. I'm listening to Kid Rock on another podcast and got to meet Bob at Jason's thing. It was awesome, but you know, he basically said that it's even him being Kid Rock, you can't be one side or the other about him. You either are like, who the is that guy, or you love me, you'll take a bullet for me. Like, and so maybe we'll get this clip to you, Bob, but it's like we're looking at this, and I love the way that you say that, because I've never really heard somebody say it, and I've heard the quote, but the way you just put it together there. So, you know, teach us a little bit more, and I can see that this is going to be multiple shows about Jesus. Like, is that it gives us the opportunity as Christians to focus on that because we're getting the season, right? To do that. But if somebody doesn't, if they don't know Jesus, how, take over right there. How would you share that?
Well, so let's just go back to Jesus, all right? And it's interesting. Jesus came in a time where if I was a young Jewish kid and I had any desire to come up in the Jewish faith, what I would be aiming for is for a rabbi to seek me out, to teach me, take me under his wing, right? Well, I would be one of the schooled kids. I would be one of the kids that was well-read. Jesus is ready to step out into his ministry. And he didn't, again, hear ideas in our head. He didn't approach guys like Peter and Andrew, James and John, like out of the blue, cold turkey, like they'd never met Jesus before. They had been following Jesus around, listening, like, I want to hear more. You know, we see in the Gospel of John that John the Baptist points Jesus out to Andrew, and Andrew hears Jesus and knows this is the Son of God. He goes and gets his brother Peter, brings Peter to Jesus. But these young men, they're fishermen. And again, let me go back to what I said a minute ago. You had the lepers, you had the shepherds. Well, the fishermen were probably like right above the shepherds. Jesus didn't go seek out the learned, clean-cut, everything's together kids, young men. This would have been like Jesus showing up to the bar or somewhere here. And I guess, I'm way here down in the South and in the mainland. I'm guessing if I went and met some fishermen like up in the Northeast, they might still be like the same kind of dudes. But Jesus goes and finds the people that's not who I would have expected him to go find, right? Well, let's look at right now. Like, think about right now in our culture, some of the people that we are seeing not just come to faith, but they're coming to faith and they are selling out to Jesus has completely transformed my life. Well, you brought up Kid Rock. You think about Russell Brand. I mean, this was one of the most drug addicted, sex craven, like trash mouth guys on the planet. And his whole life is transformed. Now, the problem that you have is like, you'll still see Kid Rock, I'll still see a video with him and he's dropping the F-bomb or whatever. Well, I have this expectation somebody's going to come to Jesus and that all of their sinful ways are immediately just going to be taken away from them. And that's not the way it happens. Right. I mean, the whole time, Jesus, 3 years of trying to teach the disciples, Peter, Lord have mercy, one dumb thing after another, after another, after another. So I look at the current state of affairs, okay? And I think, all right, well, man, if Jesus can get a hold of Russell Brand, of Kid Rock, well, then who can't he get a hold of it? And the answer to that question is there isn't anyone. There's no one out of the reach of Christ. But here's the irony in it. So, you and I, we live in Huntsville, Alabama. And to probably a lot of people, at least up until recently, I mean, you might as well have been from, Podunk, Illinois. People don't know where Huntsville, Alabama is. But this is becoming one of the fastest growing cities in America. We're one of the smartest cities in America. I don't know if you and I contribute to that stat or not.
We definitely do.
But
Yes.
we are affluent, we're influential.
Yeah.
I mean, we have the government, we have the defense, we have the space program. Like, so you look at this place and you go, man, like they've got it all. Well, that's the problem. If you ask me, what's the number one barrier, at least where you live, Brian, of someone coming to faith in Christ? It's not that they're Russell Brand and that they have almost driven their life off of a cliff. It's the opposite. It's that they look at their life and they go, I got it all together. Like, I'm smart. I may not be rich, but I got a great career. I got my finances in order. I got my beautiful wife and my 2.5 kids. I've got my 3,000 square foot home. Yeah. They've got all the answers. It's self-sufficiency. Like that's, and look at, let's combine these things together. Isn't our self-sufficient culture evident in our consumeristic Christmas? You know, one thing bleeds into another. But that's where I rest in. Jesus said to the disciples, he said, no one comes to me unless the Father first draws him. Paul says, for by grace you've been saved through faith. It's not of yourselves, it's a gift of God. And when we read that verse, we read it very evidently in the English that the grace of God is the gift, which it is. But when Paul says, for by grace you've been saved through faith, it's not of yourself, it is a gift. The grace is a gift, but so is the faith. Because before Christ, spiritually dead, right? You ever known a dead person to make a decision? No. Right. So what that means is that for anyone to respond, for anyone to hear the gospel and believe it, God has to do something there. God has to give you the faith to be able to even believe. And so bring all of this home. What that does for me is I don't any longer look at someone at face value. I don't look at how they're dressed. I don't look at how far in the ditch they are. Right. I don't look at how rich or poor they are. I know God has a different view than I do. So all I can do is pray, Lord, if they don't know you, then you do you. You do what I can't do. And my part is share the gospel. That here's the bad news. You're dead in sin. Like there's nothing you can do about it. And the wages, the consequences of that sin is death. But here's the good news. The free gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. And if you hear that, Paul says in Romans 10, faith comes through hearing the gospel. If you hear the gospel and the Lord gives you the faith to respond, do it. There is nothing greater in this life, in this world, than knowing Jesus. I came to know Christ at age 7. Walked down the aisle of the church, met with the pastor. He drew me this really cool picture of I was over here on this side and God was over here on this side, and there was this big chasm, and he drew a cross in between. Jesus bridged that gap. I believed. And I think probably somewhere around the age of 14, 15, I started knowing that God was drawing me, calling me into ministry. My dad was a minister. Well, I watched how overworked my dad was. I would see, like, I have a football game. Well, my dad wouldn't be at my football game because he's having to visit somebody in the hospital or he's having to attend to somebody. I saw ministry in that time of life And I thought, I don't want anything to do with that. No thanks. And I really do believe that from probably age 15, definitely 16, 17, I don't know that this thought ever came in my mind, but I think that something in me figuratively felt like maybe if I give God the finger long enough, he'll just go, okay, move on to somebody else. Right. And a week before I graduated from high school, I'm in my car with way too many people crammed in my car, friends of mine. We'd all been drinking. And I'm about to drive out into this intersection, and my friend reaches across the car, grabs my leg, shoves it into the brake. Everybody in my car goes flying forward. I remember I slammed my head into the steering wheel, and right about that time, this car goes flying in front of us, going about 40, 45 miles an hour. And, you know, at age 17, I quickly learned I'd heard people talk about being like immediately sobered.
Yep.
That happened. I drove my friends to, ironically, a church parking lot where all of my friends had gathered to drink.
Yeah.
I dumped my friends out of the car, went home, and I walk into my house. It's probably 12:30 at night. And I'm going to go in my room, shut the door, and we're going to just end this evening. We're done, right? Yeah. And I can hear my parents in their bedroom. And I just put my ear to my parents' door. And I can hear my parents in there at 12:30 at night praying. I went into my room, just got on my bed, and I'm pretty sure I just wept myself to sleep. But and to be clear, I never heard some kind of audible voice from the Lord.
Right.
Nothing. But I felt like God crawled into bed with me and said, Brian, I'm giving you the opportunity right now to decide. Are you going to walk my way? Are you going to walk the narrow road? Or are you going to continue to go your way?
Yeah.
That was 1 week before I graduated from high school, May 1990. My life has never been the same since.
Yeah.
So, Christmas, the Son of God chose to come because me, Brian Mayfield, on my own, you, Brian Smith, it ain't going to be good.
No.
It's going to be really destructive and bad. But the Lord said, I've got different plans. So.
Yeah, I was, actually, we were doing a show earlier with a couple, and they met, and their faith is very strong. But I told them, I said, you know, I don't want to say, I went down the aisle at 7, got saved, didn't, you know, I wouldn't have known if I was being drawn to do something because I wasn't listening to what I should have been listening to. So, but, you know, a few years ago, I told somebody that, you know, God got a hold of me, and I'm like, no, he really didn't. I just finally shut myself up, right, and started listening, which I got to say, thank you to you for being a member at Phase 3 and just being you, because when I met you, I didn't know you were a preacher. I was like, yeah, this guy's cool. He's cool. You know, we're just talking and become friends. But as we talk about who Jesus is and that changed you and made that real to you, you know, as I guess guys or looking at things or how to stay focused with it or help people through scenarios, what are some things that you would help people with here as far as this time of year or things they're dealing with?
Well, you and I were talking earlier about how we just kind of randomly Googled, like, what do people want to know about Jesus? Right. You know, and I think that probably the number one thing people wonder, whether they'll ask it out loud, they wonder in their heart, whether it's some version of why do bad things happen to good people, or the opposite. If God's loving, why does he allow suffering and evil in the world?
Yeah.
And that question of why does God allow? And I mean, you fill in the blank.
Yeah.
Again, that's a question of, I first have to answer the question of what do I believe about God's sovereignty, like his ordained will, that he's working in ways that if he explained it to me, I still wouldn't understand it, right? But I think a lot of folks, it's interesting to me that right now, and I could go off on a million different directions about things I think that have contributed to this in our society and our culture and in the world. But you look at the issue, the increasing burden of anxiety, depression, those kind of things that people are dealing with. And as somebody who grew up, I was a pastor's son. Now I'm a pastor myself. I was in youth ministry for 15 years before I became a lead pastor. But most of my years in youth ministry, I was like golden boy, like I could do no wrong. So I didn't really deal with a lot of pressure, if you will. I came here to the Brook 15 and a half years ago to be the pastor, and it was astounding to me to learn within 4, 5, 6 months, not everybody likes me. Like, not everybody thinks I had a hand in hanging the moon, But still, at that point, if you had started a conversation with me about depression, in my head, even if I didn't verbalize this, that would have been a topic to me of going like, yeah, I don't know anything about that. Like, that's for people who you just need more faith. You need to read the word more.
Yeah.
You need some more Jesus. You're obviously like, you've lowered your Jesus quota. You need to up that some, and then you'll be okay. Well, I'd been pastor here for just about a year. And I'll spare all the details, but I'm in a meeting one day, and a lady in our church who was leading a ministry forced me into making a decision that I look at it now and I'm like, oh, how differently I would have handled the whole situation. But I allowed this woman in the heat of this moment to force me into the decision, which I just made. And I knew the decision I made was the right decision for our church. Well, this lady walks out of this meeting, goes home, and she crafts this really well-written passive-aggressive email that she sends out to all the people that she knew would want to know about this decision. What apparently all those people didn't know is that she copied me on the email. Well, they all start hitting reply to all. And so within like 24 hours, I'm reading all of these emails about who does he think he is, and we're not going to take this, and blah, blah, blah. Well, never in my life, at least not in ministry. I mean, I'd hardly ever faced a person like opposing me. Well, now I'm envisioning like the village, they've got torches lit and they're coming to my house, And brother, I mean, that was a Thursday. By Monday morning of the next week, I was a wreck. I'm at a counselor's office who then sends me to my doctor, who then for the first time in my life says, hey, I'm going to put you on an antidepressant. And I'm like, what? Like, you've just put me in a group that I'm not supposed to be in.
Right.
And, so here I sit 14 years later, and I can tell you what I really experienced. That was the first time in my life that I know of that I had an anxiety attack. you know, and again, and not to beat a dead horse here, but that was for other people. That was for people who didn't have enough faith.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a pastor. How am I supposed to tell people that not only did I have an anxiety attack, but now my doctors put me on medicine?
Yeah.
What in the Sam Hill?
Right.
And I'll tell you, you know, you said, you know, this is for another show. All right. Well, another show is for me to tell you everything I've learned about how my thyroid gland not working and your gut health is going to have bearing on anxiety and depression.
Yes.
But we'll save that for another day.
Yes. Yeah. Step into the future with Power Loops, the king of off-grid power, where our proprietary system is changing the game of energy. This isn't just power, it's freedom. The freedom to live, work, and play anywhere, powered by our innovative technology that taps into the Earth's natural energy. Our system is designed for efficiency, durability, and sustainability, ensuring that you have reliable power 365 days a year without harming the planet. Whether you're traveling in the RV, the remote wilderness, or just opting out of traditional power grids, Power Loops provides the ultimate solution. Join us in leading the charge towards a cleaner, greener, and more empowered world. Power Loops, the king of off-grid energy. Yes.
Today,
No, but thank you for saying that because, you know, because people will sit here and listen to the show and go, well, if he would just eat right and he would get his blood work.
Right.
Yeah, so thank you.
The moral of the story is there are mental health issues. There are chemical imbalances. There are just overwhelming circumstantial things that we face that it doesn't have to do with a lack of faith. It has to do with when sin entered this world, it jacked things up. Now, if I had known that anxiety was coming, I might have prepared myself differently through scripture, through prayer, etc. But that's the whole thing of life. When does suffering or sorrow or pain or trial, when does it ever call ahead? Go, hey, I just want you to know I'm going to be showing up next Monday. It doesn't. So be prepared.
Right.
But don't isolate yourself. Don't think, oh, if I had just had more faith. No, if you had had more faith, you still probably would have walked through this.
And that's, you know, as we started this podcast, I can go back, probably 12, 13 months ago, one of the guests that we had, we sat down and I told him, I said, you know, sometimes even though I've been a Christian this many years, etc., but being able to help people. And he looked at me and the way he said it, and he was a soccer player and he knew I'd play baseball. He's like, but all you got to do is just be one step ahead of the guy behind you. And when he told me that, it's like, okay, I know, God, I don't have all this figured out. And then sometimes it's hard for me to help somebody, you know, because I look to guys like you. I'm like, well, he gets up in front of the church. He can do that, and he can tell people about Jesus. But I'm just going to sit back here, you know. But and to encourage guys who are, I mean, you talk about developing the community and everything, and I love that. But maybe they're not preachers, but they're wanting to speak up. But you know, being one step ahead of that other guy to say, hey, it's okay to be honest about this, or let's talk about that, or it is depression, or you know what, I've been there. This is what I did, right? That's what we're doing here. So, you know, I guess I'm being greedy again, because sometimes on the show, I'm like, I get, you know, a little bit of a analysis on this side and I give a little self-reflection there, but no, that's encouraging. So for a guy, you know, to get that and be proud of that experience, you know, and you're going into that, but how did you get there and use that from the aspect of, I got on these, I'm not supposed to be in that category, and now I'm here. So, you know.
So if I understand what you're asking me, I think I went through a year of honestly, like, not necessarily denial, but of just confusion of like, I don't get this.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why, Lord, why did you bring me here to deal with this? Like, I was golden boy back there.
Mm-hmm.
And so let me go back further. January 9th, 2004, I go to the airport. One of my students had come back from Marine boot camp. We welcome him home. We go to his house. Everybody's having a great time. And my phone rings, and it's my brother. And he says, hey, could you get somewhere alone? So I go get into Jeff's bedroom, shut the door. I'm like, what's going on? And he said, so Dad fell through the ceiling and hit his head, and we're on the way to the hospital. And I'm like, oh, okay. Well, you know, let me know. And he's like, no, you're not understanding. So my parents had built this home with 12-foot ceilings. My dad went into the attic to put Christmas decorations away.
Mm-hmm.
Still to this day, we don't understand how this happened. But my dad fell through the ceiling all the way into the kitchen and hit his head on the island.
Oh, wow.
They're on the way to the hospital in the ambulance. My brother's in the ambulance with them. They're trying to resuscitate my dad.
Mm-hmm.
My daughter's 2. Son's not even born yet. Next morning, we get up, get on a plane, go to Dallas-Fort Worth.
Mm-hmm.
To put it to you, I mean, just straightforward, over the next 72 hours, my dad essentially died like 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
They brought him back. My mom had 2 of 3 neurosurgeons tell her, Mrs. Mayfield, if your husband ever physically wakes up, like he's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Like his brain will not recover from the midline shift that occurred there in this injury. And I remember, that happened. That was a Thursday or Friday night, and we flew there on a Saturday morning. Well, the next day, like Sunday. So this is a really weird story, but bear with me. My hair had grown out. And I wake up that Sunday morning, and you know, what barber shop is open on a Sunday morning? I like had this moment of like freaking out of like, I got to get this hair off my head. And I got in my mom's car and I'm driving down the road. And by the time I go to the mall, all right, and find a haircut place. But my point is, I'm driving to the mall. And every time I pull up at a stoplight, I'm looking to my right and my left. And I'm looking at people different. Because all of a sudden in my life, something has happened that I've never known this emotion before. I'm looking at people and wondering, like, what's she going through? Because I'm sitting here and my dad is possibly dying or dead in a hospital. And 72 hours ago, I didn't know this was going to happen. And here I am. And to give you the rest of the story of that, my dad was in a level 1 coma for 5 weeks, meaning like what you think of as a coma in a movie, right? It was 5 weeks before he opened his eyes. Then my dad began about a 9-month battle of coming out of that. I had no earthly idea until that event in our lives that there are 8 levels to coma.
Okay, no, I didn't know that.
Yeah. You've probably met somebody in a coma before, like level 7 or 8, that they're eating tacos. You know, they seem to be, you know, everything's okay, but they're still progressively working out of it. If you'd met my dad a year after his accident, you wouldn't have thought, I bet this guy had a traumatic brain injury. you probably would have thought something's a little off with Jerry. You know, the filter of like understanding, okay, maybe we've beat a dead horse here. Maybe that isn't appropriate here. It was like that was kind of gone. But then a year later, when my dad gets cancer and then battles it for 3 years and passes away in December of 2008, if you had seen me or my brother during that, there were a lot of people that I think they had a lot of conflict with. It didn't look like we were grieving over our dad's death.
Yeah.
And I remember I spoke at my dad's funeral. And I remember telling the people at my dad's funeral, like, I buried my dad in my mind and my heart, like 5 years ago.
Yeah.
God gave me 5 more years with my dad. But I shared that story with you to say, let's come back to the anxiety, the depression.
Mm-hmm.
Where the Lord brought me with all of that is, there is, and this isn't just for a minister, this is for each of us as a human. There's no greater gift that we can be given than empathy, that we can look at another person and even if they are a different ethnicity, they're from the other side of the world, we're from completely, like there's nothing in common in our life other than that. We felt grief.
Mm-hmm.
We've had sorrow show up at our door. And again, as I said, it's always unexpected. Like, and it comes and kicks the door in.
Yeah.
But it helps us to know, you know, you and I were talking earlier, and I think it was just when we were just chatting it up, but we were talking about like, you know, how old was Jesus when Joseph died? You know, we don't know.
Right.
Well, but you go to John 11 and Jesus, they come and find Jesus and they say, Jesus, your friend Lazarus is dying. And Jesus says, okay. And you would expect Jesus to say, hey, everybody, we got to go.
Mm-hmm.
Lazarus is dying.
Mm-hmm.
But he stays where he is for 2 more days. And Lazarus dies.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus shows up. And Lazarus' sisters, Mary and Martha, they come give Jesus the what's up. I mean, you talk about audacity. Jesus, if you had been here, our brother wouldn't have died.
Mm-hmm.
And we see Jesus go to the tomb with them. And you know, there we have it. John 11:35 is the shortest verse in the Bible. Every kid wants to memorize it in Bible drill. Jesus wept. But you know, that's like, there's got to be like 18 sermons there.
Right.
You have to think to yourself, what do you think Jesus did when his dad died? Yeah, he's the Son of God, but God gave him this earthly father. At some point, Joseph died. Maybe Jesus was 18, maybe he was 22.
Mm-hmm.
I bet he wept.
Mm-hmm.
He wept like I wept over my dad, laying there in that bed. But Jesus, again, we need to know that we have a high priest who he understands us in every way. That's how he can advocate for us. Jesus had empathy. He saw Mary and Martha and the friends weeping. That was his friend buried in that tomb. He unloads. And then after all that, he finally says, all right, Lazarus, come out, you know. Mm-hmm. And Lord, that dude probably stunk. But I look at the anxiety and the depression, mm-hmm. and I will tell you, you know, since about 2018, the Lord has given me just great victory over that.
Mm-hmm.
I still take medication.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to struggle or deal with that anymore, but I'm grateful that I have, because I can sit down with somebody, whether they're in my church or at the gym, I mean, I can't tell you how many people at the gym,
Yeah.
like, they want to talk about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, I love God and I trust God, but I'm struggling with this. And
Right.
I'm able to say, I get it.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have a magic answer, but I know the one who has the answers.
Yes.
So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no. And here's, as we wanted to put this show together and look at a couple parts, because every time we talk, we lead into the next one. And I want to get more about this. But to understand that, there's a lot more to the honesty that you're able to share because you've been there, done that. And, I've said here, and when we started this show, and there's people in here right now on the other side right there that, there was a time that I sat down and talked to Stu and I said, hey, this happened. Why did it? Well, I really, and for me, sometimes things bring it on, if I pull this thing and I'm pulling my studio down the road, and then I'm getting tired, and he's like, hey, bro, you've been driving. Let me drive I can't ride. I'll get anxiety. I'll feel certain things, right? I will. And it's gotten to the point where we kind of argue over who's going to do it because who wants to feel, he usually lets me drive because he knows I'm a baby when it comes to it. But that's one level of it. And it can go to different levels, and it can go to, but how we deal with that, I feel like has also helped me. But there's been times that I've had to reach out and get help. The medication part, I haven't experienced just because for me, it was that I needed to get here. For me, it was that. Mm-hmm. And when you said that, I was the guy that was like, hey, bro, hey, and like I said, you helped me with that there because, we've never really talked about it, but there's certain things that you can empathize and see and gift people. And that's what Jesus has done for you. And that's your gift. So the one thing that I want to make sure that every show that we do, because you never know which one the people are going to see, if you had just a couple minutes to share with people, like just this is what I want. If you got to hear me, because this is, I go back to, and Shane Hopkins, if you're not watching this, I'm going to tell you, Brother Billy, to whip your butt again. But I had a baseball coach join us one night. And I don't know if you know Shane, Billy, these guys, but Shane was a high school baseball coach. And I said, hey, Shane, hey, bro, why don't you take 10 minutes and talk to my team before we get started? And I say this story because of our baseball connection and all that. And Shane goes, I got you, B. I got you. All right. He comes down. He goes, you said 10 minutes, right? I said, yes, sir. He takes a stopwatch. Beep. So Brian wanted me to come down here and take 10 minutes. And if I'm going to get 10 minutes to talk to a group of guys, we're not talking about hitting, pitching, fielding, throwing, or base running, okay? And that humbled me. So if you had just a few minutes like that, just bam, this is the gospel. This is where we're at. That's your camera, and you take over and share it. So,
man, I would say to anybody, anytime, anywhere, Jesus is enough. Jesus is all that you need. We're in a world right now that I think there's a lot of confusing spiritual and religious language that means well, but that leads us away from the gospel. And again, anything I say here, I don't mean in judgment, condemnation. I'm just trying to pound through to the truth. Like, if the gospel somebody presents to you is about you, if it's about your breakthrough or whatever the language is, that's not it. The gospel is about the God of the universe and his glory, and that he has chosen in his perfection, to say to you and I have loved you enough that I've sent my son to pay the penalty for your sin so that you could have life. And I think that people, they even hear that. They hear the gospel, and then they don't realize that this is enough. Like, this is the word of God. I don't need outside of this. I don't need anyone to come into my life and speak a special word of prophecy for me. I don't need special knowledge. I have the word. And when you and I have the word and the spirit to guide us, we even use language like the Lord spoke to me. I try not to even use those words, because for someone outside of the faith, they hear that and they go, really? God spoke to you? Well, no, he didn't speak to me audibly, but because he has made me and all of his people, he's said, I'm going to send my spirit to live within you. And when I have the spirit takes the word. It's called the sword of the spirit. The spirit takes the word and pierces my heart and mind with it. It speaks. It speaks very clearly. Now, it doesn't speak loudly, but it speaks clearly often. But this is what you need. You need the Lord. You need his word. And let's just bring it back once again to Christmas. We always hear the Gospel of Luke. We hear the Gospel of Matthew at Christmas. But John apparently was the poetic one among them. He wrote weird. And he begins his gospel by saying, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He is the Word of God. That also means that if I start reading in Genesis and I read about Abraham bringing Isaac, his son, God said, Abraham, I want you to offer your son to me. And Abraham obediently said, okay. And he's going to take him up on the hill and sacrifice him. And God stops him and provides a ram in the thicket. Well, I realize now that Isaac was the son who was spared. Jesus was the son who was not spared. Yeah, there was a lamb provided. Jesus was it. Right? And I go through the Old Testament and I see Moses lift up his staff in the wilderness. He strikes the rock with it and water comes forth. Jesus comes out and he says, I must be lifted up like Moses' staff in the wilderness. Moses' staff brings water out of a rock. Jesus says, I've come to bring you living water. He is the Word. He is not a way. He is the way, the truth, the life. And in him, you can have life. That's what I would say to anybody. If I got my 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever,
Right.
That's my elevator pitch.
Gotcha.
If I can lead you to know Christ, then mission accomplished.
Amen. And normally I wrap the show up right there, but I'm gonna have one more thing because we're in sales, right? And doing the things we've done in many different jobs. And when you said the elevator pitch right there, I've talked to some preachers before. I'm like, you guys really do have a pretty difficult job sometimes. But once guys like me let go and let God take control and experience this side of the freedom and this side of the connection and opportunity to truly give, because I'm being overly blessed in so many ways, it's like, I want to encourage guys to listen and do that, because it does. It makes life's a lot easier, right? When you have that. Mm-hmm. So, again, I'm being a little selfish during this show, stealing a little bit of more knowledge, but we'll definitely get into this more. So tell us a little bit, your church, your Instagram. You haven't said anything about that. What do you want to throw out there? You want to give them a shout out, because I know you got some great bloopers and you got a team that works hard there. So
yes. So I'm pastor of the church called The Brook here in little old Madison, Alabama. Really when I got here 15 and a half years ago, I mean, it still felt like we were kind of out in the middle of nowhere, and now it's just exploding.
Yeah.
But man, I serve with some incredible pastors, elders, staff. The thing about our church, and you and I have talked about this, I think we have this common blessing. Just being at a church where people are outwardly focused, and that's never going to be everyone. But this summer I had my sabbatical, and throughout that 2 months, I think I went to 7 different churches. I guarantee you that 5 or 6 of those 7, I got in and out of that place without anybody talking to me. Well, I could come away and tell you those weren't friendly people. Those weren't friendly churches. No, like if you want to go into a place, church or otherwise, and kind of fly under the radar, you can pull it off.
Yeah.
I don't know that you can at my church.
Yeah. No, you can't.
There's just a sense of hospitality, and I'm grateful for that. I just feel like, honestly, after 15, 16 years, like I just show up and preach.
Yeah.
And there are so many other people doing important things. But I desire, man, I feel like we're still kind of like the pandemic. The way I equate it is, it's like, man, it blew your leg off, as churches, because I mean, for a couple of years you were removed from the global mission field. But what's crazy is, like, our church next year, we're headed back to South Asia. We're headed to Uganda. We had taken teams to share the gospel. But locally, I feel like we're still like limping along, trying to refigure out how do we really love and engage our community well, serve our community well. So that's an area where we're trying to still kind of get our act together. But man, I love living in this city. So my wife, she's a speech therapist by trade, but Morgan is one of the sharpest people I know. She is a disciple maker. And my daughter has now graduated from college and is teaching 7th grade English.
Awesome.
So you want to talk about being in the mission field? And my son, like is playing college baseball, and we are currently trying to figure out how to get to the Tennessee playoff game.
Yeah.
So
I got you.
We'll see if we pull it off.
Well,
brother, thanks for having me on here.
Thank you. Well, the one thing I'll say right there on your family, you did say it, how sharp your wife was, because she obviously picked you. And she did a great job. That's why he's giving you kudos there on the heads up. But thank you so much for being here.
Yes, sir.
All right. Appreciate it, brother.
Thanks, Brian.
And thank you guys for watching Podcast on Wheels.